Okay. This is March 22nd, 2012, and we are interviewing Donald Wright, the Harold Burson Professor of Public Relations at Boston University. This is for the Page Center Oral History Project. Thanks for taking time out of your day to do this, Don. We appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm a huge fan of the Arthur W. Page Society and of the Page Center, so it's my pleasure. It's an honor to be asked to do this.
Great. As editor of Public Relations Journal, PR Journal, you've had a good perspective on current research in the field. What is the direction of research in public relations today, and what issues can we expect to see explored in the future?
Well, the very nature of Public Relations Journal, and the fact that it's an online refereed, blind reviewed journal, so essentially, certainly the nation's and probably the world's first public relations scholarly journal, only published online. The turnaround time for an article to be accepted and then published within Public Relations Journal is very short. I mean, we've had situations where an article has been good enough and timely enough that maybe within a month after receiving it, it's been published. And when you look at the other scholarly journals in public relations, it can take 4, it can take 5. I know of one situation with a piece of research that I was the author of. It took 6 years to get published. So public relations is changing more dramatically than situation where we can wait 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And authors know this, and so particularly things like social media studies, things that are related to the new technologies or the emerging media. Since we started in 2007, we've had a lot of social or new or emerging media articles. But there's other things too that I think are shaping the landscape of the scholarly literature, not just in Public Relations Journal, but in the rest of the studies that are out there. And clearly the ROI question, I mean, everybody is looking for the return on investment situation. What's the magic formula? And of course, if whoever finds it is going to be, sitting on an island, very rich, because but that's one of the big wannabes. We're seeing some very interesting things relative to measurement. That for far too many years, much of the measurement in public relations related to advertising value equivalencies, AVEs. I've often said that it's really unfortunate that AVEs doesn't come with an additional letter, so then we could call it a 4-letter word, and we could sort of say we will not use that word. But the whole concept of advertising value equivalencies as measurement for public relations is beyond ludicrous, and the problem is that the other methods are in some cases emerging, and in most cases much more expensive to implement than the simplicity of the AVEs. So we have that situation. Furthering along the measurement line, we have the question of standards. What are the appropriate standards of measurement? How should these be implemented, and so forth and so on. And then the other area that I see is ethics. I can remember back in the 25, 30 years ago when I was publishing some of the first articles that dealt with social responsibilities and ethics in public relations. A lot of people were critical of those studies, not necessarily critical of the methodological approach or anything that I was writing, but the fact that somebody would assume that there would be ethics within public relations or any aspect of corporate communication. Of course, that we're in a different world today. Transparency is crucial. We saw, a decade ago with the situations involving organizations such as Enron and Global Crossing and Tyco and Health South and a number of Arthur Andersen and other organizations like that. So ethics, I would add to that list as well.
You've done quite a bit of research yourself in the area of social media. Was Marshall McLuhan right? Is the medium the message?
I've never thought Marshall McLuhan was right, although I'm an admirer of what he did to basically get information about communication and communication research introduced to a wider audience. But I don't think that the medium ever has become the message. I think what's crucial is what you put in the medium that becomes the message, regardless of whether it was the television situations that McLuhan wrote about, or the social media situations that we have today, or anything in between.
Most of the ethical issues in communication focus on the responsibilities of the sender of the message. But you've said that the receivers and users of the messages have ethical responsibilities too. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, if you turn back the clock to the time before we had what we now call new or emerging media, that the senders really controlled the message, and that there was very little opportunity for a receiver to provide feedback. I mean, the receiver could do things like possibly write a letter to the editor, or when talk radio came along, call in to a station and talk about the topic. But the topic was always decided by the sender, not by the receiver. And if you take a look at the traditional models of communication, the who says what to whom through which channel with what effect, that famous Laswell paradigm, or any of the writings of the earliest communication scholars, Wilbur Schramm, the work of Paul Lazarsfeld, and a number of other political science and sociologists of the 1930s and 1940s, who kind of became the first scholars of what we call today communication theory. If you look at any of that work, I mean, the sender directed those messages. All of the models focused on the sender, and the only exceptions for that were, as some of the research progressed, and particularly the Erie County, Ohio voting studies and so forth and so on in the 1940s. That we started to look at what the academic term is opinion leaders, the practitioner term would be influentials, and we started to look at how opinion leaders or influentials were passing messages along to receivers, and looking at the two-step flow communication or multi-step flow communication theories. I mean, now we're in a situation where the receiver can, if he or she wishes to do so, can basically decide, what to look for. 30 years ago, if you were a sports fan, you would pick up the sports page of your newspaper, and the sports editors would determine what you would read. So there would be many more stories on that sports page about men playing football or men playing basketball than there would be about high school girls involved in gymnastics. Now, and if you were a parent of a high school girl who is on the gymnastics team, you would probably have to be satisfied with only a small paragraph here or there. Today, you can go to through the web, and we all know today I think the sports example is a great one, because we all know of situations where a young woman is on a college gymnastics team or the swimming team or what have you, and the parent really doesn't care how that institution's football team did, but they really do care about how the women's swimming team did, and they can go to websites and not only get results, but in many cases, particularly with what are called the so-called minor sports, particularly with sports such as soccer and so forth and so on, you can sometimes get play-by-play television of them. I mean, it's not going to be done by the same crew that's going to be broadcasting the Rose Bowl or Monday Night Football, but you can get that information, and so I think that this has played a a very significant role in elevating the significance of the receiver in the communication models.
You know, parenthetically, it sure has made life harder for sports information directors
Absolutely.
at small colleges.
Absolutely, yeah.
Parents want to read the results of the softball game
Exactly.
5 minutes after it's over.
Of course, exactly, yeah, really, yeah.
You've taught at numerous universities in different parts of the country. Are there any changes in the teaching or learning of public relations over the years that seem noteworthy to you that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, there's several things about sort of the development of public relations, and there's one area sort of as an exception that I'll toss out here because I have a pretty big concern about it, and that's the fact that what I would call the proliferation of public relations education. That we're teaching public relations at an unusually high number of institutions today, and I've been somewhat outspoken about this. That if you it's hard to kind of do the math because some of public relations education is based, such as the programs that you're familiar with at Penn State and my program at Boston University, are based in colleges or academic units that grew out of the journalism mass communication realm of the academy. But a number of other elements of public relations education grew out of what we used to call speech communication departments. In many cases, they've dropped the word speech, but they haven't dramatically changed the things that they teach. And if you add all of those numbers up, you'll find that there's, I've seen some numbers as low as 30,000, some as high as 50,000. I mean, if there's 50,000 young men and women out there studying public relations right now, that means that each year over 12,000 kids are graduating with degrees in public relations. And I've sometimes said that we should find somebody who has the intestinal fortitude to look those young men and women straight in the face and say, most of you are never going to get a job in our field. So I think that's an issue that has to be brought up if we're talking about public relations education. But your question was more related to how has the field changed and has that changed public relations education? And I think the best way to describe that, and of course, being a huge fan of Harold Burson and being in the Harold Burson endowed professorship at Boston University, I do tend to admire a lot of things that Harold has written. And he has described the way the field has changed over the 60 plus years that he's been in the field. And he's described it by saying when he first entered the public relations business in the late 1940s and early 1950s, that essentially what he was asked to do was answer the question that how should we say it? The decision about what to say, the decision about what to do and how to do it, had all been made by others. And the public relations people were almost like the journalists in residence. I mean, they were not involved at all, as they are today, in strategic planning and so forth and so on. We did a good job, according to Harold, in help answering that question. How should we say it? So our counsel was sought relative to what should we say, and progressed upwards. So today, in the nation's most highly successful companies, public relations, or whatever you call the function, sometimes it's called corporate communications, sometimes it's called public affairs, and so forth and so on. But the public relations function, the chief communications officer, the chief public relations officer, whatever the title is, that person is very much involved in the dominant coalition, the decision-making realm of the organization. And so public relations today deals with, what should we do, how should we do it, what should we say, and how should we say it. And I think you'll find that at least the better public relations programs have adapted to kind of follow that development over the years.
Turning to public relations more generally than the educational aspect of it, What do you see as the greatest challenges facing public relations executives today, and how can these be met?
I think there's several things that we should talk about in this area, and I'd like to do it with the in the spirit of the idea that challenges also can be opportunities, because I think that the fact that public relations now is much more strategic communication. It's much more. I mean, the chief public relations officer at the most successful companies has the same status in the organization as the attorney has when you're dealing with questions that relate to the law, and the communication officer deals with those situations in what I like to call the arena of public opinion. I don't think there is a court of public opinion, because I believe the court, as in a legal court, both sides of the story get to be told. But in public opinion, often if you get your side of the story out there first, that will be the side of the story that is believed. So that I think that given that perspective, I think that we could list some things here relative to the challenges, and clearly the pressures of the 24/7 news environment. You used to be able to, if you had some bad news, you could announce it on Friday afternoon and it would sort of go away. It doesn't happen anymore. You can't ask a question of this nature and not have an answer that deals with something about the economy, because the economy is impacted so much by organizations today, and not just the housing issues, but we have wage and salary issues. We have people out of work. We also have Americans who are now taking on jobs that, there are some very major companies in the United States who have gone to the workforce and said, look, we can keep these jobs in the U.S., but they're only going to pay $15 an hour, that we can no longer pay you $35. And at first, unions and workers and everybody says, well, we don't want those jobs. Well, now we do, because $15 an hour isn't much, but it's better than minimum wage or nothing, and the company can very well go elsewhere in the world and have those products made. So you have the economy as an issue. I think you have globalization. I think as public relations has moved away from sort of the publicity press agency function and moved much more into working with companies, counseling them what to do and how to do it, then I think a challenge for public relations is a reality that the tenure of CEOs is much shorter than it used to be. In some cases, it's only 2 to 3 years. I think the average is somewhere in the 3 to 4 year range for Fortune 200 companies. And that if you are the public relations officer and you are working very closely with the CEO, when there's a CEO change, then the new CEO might wish to bring in another another chief public relations officer. So I think that those are issues as well.
The aim of the Arthur W. Page Center at Penn State and of the Arthur W. Page Society is to help individuals become counselors to leadership. How can individuals best prepare themselves for that role?
There are two schools of thought in the answer to this question, and one of those schools is that, well, we're sort of born into the nurturing business. We're kind of whether or not you're going to be an effective counselor will be determined sort of at birth. The other is that you can learn it as you go along, and I'm very much in the latter school. I think a good word for counseling is coaching. We tend to, the term coaching, certainly in the United States, we tend to reserve only for people in athletic endeavors. But I think coaching is a good word for counseling. And I think we need to develop good coaches who are not only coaching executives, CEOs, CFOs, and other members of the C-suite, but also good at coaching people who report to them, people at entry and second level positions. I think that that's important. That there's lots of things we can study in terms of to do this better. One of the things that I'd like to see is a little bit better relationship between some of the schools of business and schools of management, and then some of the schools of communication, because I do think that you are going to be a much more effective counselor if you understand both the management marketing side from the business school, and if you understand the science beneath the art aspects of communication schools, plus the communication techniques that we teach. And I think it's helpful if going forward interviews of the nature that you and I are participating in now address this question, because we need to deal with it. I think historically sometimes, well, if you go back way historically, we used to hire, I mean, the main prerequisite for a job in public relations was that you worked as a journalist. That's not the case anymore. I mean, the main prerequisite to be the physician in the Wild West was that you once worked in a drugstore. And I don't know too many physicians today who have on their resumes that they used to work at a drugstore. So I think that the education and the training of people who aspire to be senior communications officers in corporations and other organizations should involve some education and development in those areas.
Are you seeing some liaisons between schools of management and schools of communications / departments of public relations?
I mean, it would be, it's an understatement to say that there are problems in that area. Part of the problems tie around financial. That at most universities, students are lined up to take classes in business schools and in communication schools. I mean, at Boston University, we only accept about fewer than 1/4 of the students that apply to get into our university at the undergraduate level, and for our graduate degree in public relations, it's not at all uncommon for us to have 200 applications, and we only accept 50 of them. So that we don't have a whole bunch of room in our classes to let business students study public relations. The situation with the business schools often is even more pronounced. I don't know what the answer is, but I like to see us to be able, to work together so that people who study public relations can have a better understanding of business, and so people who are involved in both undergraduate and graduate courses at business schools can have a better understanding of public relations and other aspects of communication.
Okay. I think that you have to some extent answered this next question already, but I'd like to ask it discreetly again. What do you see as the status of the counseling role of public relations in the corporate world today? Is it growing in importance or diminishing? Yeah,
definitely growing. There's no question that it's growing. I don't see how you can practice public relations without involving counseling. One of the weird things about public relations is that we tend to call everybody who does anything even slightly related to public relations a public relations person. So the person promoting the circus is a public relations person, and then the person counseling the President of the United States on communication matters also would be referred to as a public relations person. We don't do that in law enforcement. We don't look out the window right now and see somebody writing a parking ticket and call that person a lawyer, even though that individual is performing a legal job. And we distinguish. We have, on the legal side, we have judges and we have attorneys, and we have prosecutors and defenders, and we break these categories down so much. Same thing within the other traditional professions. Certainly medicine, we could give all kinds of examples of that, and within divinity, the clergy, and so forth and so on. You know, you'll have bishops and priests and deacons and, you know, all sorts of other types of titles. But in public relations, boy, I mean, anybody doing anything is classified as a public relations person. I don't think that way. I think that to be involved in public relations, you must be involved in that part of the practice that involves research and planning and communication and then evaluation at the end of it. So I would take all of these one-way communication people, individuals who are only involved in media relations, only involved in event planning and so forth and so on, and I would call them publicists, or I would call them press agents or something like that. I would strongly argue that counseling is a very integral part of public relations.
Is it important for a corporation to have an ethical mission statement or a credo? Should ethics training be provided for corporate staff?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that if you take a look at the companies that have those codes of ethics, I mean, and I think probably the best example is Johnson & Johnson. And when you go to the Johnson & Johnson corporate, I mean, some companies that I go inside, I'll see the ethics statement and it'll be something framed on the wall in a glass frame, and they could, if they wanted to take it down this afternoon, retype a new code and have it up there in the frame. When you go into the Johnson & Johnson headquarters, their credo is carved in stone in the wall, and they have rarely changed that code over the past century, and most of the changes in that code have not dealt with the substance of the code. They've dealt with things that fall more into political correctness categories, where they've changed some he's to theys, and so forth and so on, to make the language more common. I also think that the companies that have codes of ethics and follow them, like Johnson & Johnson and IBM and GE and FedEx, UPS, a number of other organizations, have clearly weathered critical storms much better than companies that did not. Companies such as Enron, and I mean, there's a long list on that on the other side.
What education or previous professional experience best prepares a person for the rigors of ethical decision making as regards communications?
Theoretically, to be properly trained to be a public relations practitioner, you should graduate from high school and then go to a college or a university for 10 or 15 years. Nobody's going to do that. I mean, I don't even think the best trained specialists in nuclear medicine and so forth and so on add that much education to their own learning portfolios. One of the things about ethics is, while there's a lot of value in certainly incorporating ethics into both the undergraduate and the graduate curriculum, perhaps an overview class in a philosophy department, and then an applied class in a communication school or in a business school. There's an awful lot that a person can do to become aware of ethics and ethical issues outside of the classroom. Those who are inclined to be religious, it doesn't matter what the religion. It doesn't matter whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Buddhism or anything. There are tremendous aspects of learning about ethics in the religious literature, and there's just other things that people can read. And we can talk about this all we want, but basically most people, I mean, certainly 95+% of the people in this country know what ethical behavior is and know what unethical behavior is, and at some point, will make decisions to function as an ethical person or as an unethical person. We could spend an hour talking about ways that people could better prepare themselves to do that, and but through not just traditional learning, but through other aspects of learning, I think there's many things people can do to be a little bit more ethical tomorrow than they are today.
Finally, in your experience through teaching at a number of colleges and universities around the country, do you have any perspectives to share with us on issues of diversity in public relations today?
Well, I think diversity is a a very important component in not just in public relations, but in terms of all aspects of society. And I'm personally proud that I have a pretty strong record of advocating those things. Years ago, when I taught at the University of Texas and worked with a group of people to help get a street named Martin Luther King Boulevard, and not a street sort of that went through all neighborhoods of the city. Not in some communities there's a Martin Luther King Boulevard, but it's often a ghetto somewhere. And in Austin, we didn't do that. So I've been a strong advocate for that. But there's two things relative to diversity, and one of them is that people have to be. Judy Turk, who is one of the more noted public relations educators, and now is a professor in communication and public relations at Virginia Commonwealth University. She has said that women who want to advance to higher levels of public relations management must be prepared to make some of the same sacrifices that men have made over the years. Pointing out, for example, that if you're going to be a senior level corporate communication person, you have to work 24/7. You can't say, oh well, I'm not working on weekends because I'm going to be a mother today. The rules don't work that way. And some of the most successful women in public relations have Marilyn Laurie, who was the senior vice president at AT&T and was truly one of the most noted corporate public relations people of all time, man or woman. Her husband Bob was a freelance photographer, so his career, he could adjust his career to hers. You could say similar stories about Carol Howard, who had a fairly distinguished career at AT&T and went on to become the chief communications officer at the Reader's Digest. So you've got those circumstances and situations. You can't have a 10 to 2 job with daycare provided and expect that you're going to be the senior vice president. The other situation that you have with diversity is a financial one. And I completely believe that one of the reasons that we don't have more men practicing public relations today, and that we don't have more men of all races, but particularly African American men, is that the starting salaries for so many public relations jobs are so unbelievably low that they can make more money doing other things. We've had graduates of our master's program in public relations at BU, the world's oldest graduate degree program. We've had students taking jobs in New York, and the starting salary is around $35,000. Now, we've also had graduates of our program within the last few years taking jobs where the annual remuneration can be over $100,000 with the bonus and a number of other situations. But the starting salaries for many of the jobs are not attractive to, and I think that provides an issue as well. Things are changing. I mean, there's certainly far more women today who have advanced to senior level positions in corporate communications and public relations, and we have a few more people of color who are in those areas. We don't have enough. Hopefully 10 years from now things will be better than they were today, because they're certainly better. They're certainly better today than they were a decade ago, but we've got a long way to go before we're really there yet, relative to diversity and a number of other issues in the field.
Is there anything else that you would like to say that we haven't talked about that ought to be said?
No, I would just, the only thing I'd like to say was I think that it's good that that the Page Center is doing this. And I mean, hopefully you're able in this process to interview people who are far greater and better than me. But I'm very happy that this is being done, and I commend the directors of the Page Center and of course Larry Foster for his initiative in establishing this in the first place, because it's exercises such as these that are going to make public relations much better tomorrow than it is today. So I would throw praise back at you folks. So, and thank you.
Thank you, Don Wright.